to the Content That Grows podcast. I'm sitting down again today with Derek Flint, marketing manager at 10 Speed. How's it going, Derek?
It's going well. Another great chat on, Twitter today.
Yes. Yeah, so we're excited to continue the conversation around content distribution and repurposing, and a big part of that is social content. And so we've kind of already covered why distribution matters and who should own it. And so this episode we're really kind of going all in on Twitter distribution, and then next episode will be LinkedIn. So we're going to dedicate a couple episodes to really spend some time on this because there's a lot of nuance to it. So excited to get going. Definitely going to cover quite a bit. So just to get started, Derek, would love to actually just have you hit on some of the quirks of distributing content on Twitter.
Yeah, so the reason I want to cover this first is I think in order to be successful on Twitter, like any social media app, is that you have to figure out the way this thing is working and the way people are behaving on it. So the first thing I would say is Twitter is an interestingly communal space. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to imagine a brand alone being successful just by posting content and hoping that someone picks it up. So I think whether it's an influencer or your employee or teammates should probably be a prominent figure on there, someone who's regularly posting or engaging, or it's your founder, right, who's kind of taking charge. People are naturally kind of pulled magnetically towards CEOs and founders for their journey. Yeah. I think, that's huge. I think that the other kind of weird thing that I think especially differentiates it from LinkedIn is kind of how casual the Twitter space feels, mm-hmm. whether it's just people occasionally feeling the need to curse or just sharing more personal takes and opinions. There's a feeling of I'm just hanging out here. I'm taking a smoke break. I just hang out on Twitter all day. Yeah. Part of that is just how fast paced it is. Things are moving through that feed. They don't really sit there for days. So you may have a half-hour window where people see what it is you posted, and then it's just gone. So you really want to get people's attention. I think another weird quirk about Twitter, if you start to have success, so you start to post things, they're working, people are attached to it, you maybe get some influencers from your industry to help kind of spike interest in whatever you're doing or distributing. It's still hard to figure out who your followers are all of the time because there's so much noise around who's following you. Yeah. So you likely are hitting brands and things, but there's also just a million people, or there's bots with mm-hmm. 5 followers that are sort of engaging, and those people will trail off eventually as well. So as fast as they come and they might become a follower for you, and you see your follower count growing, you can quickly get discouraged on Twitter. So whatever you're doing isn't working, no one's doing anything. So those people also just leave Twitter. So it's pretty important to stay updated and continue to build followers on that platform.
Yep.
I think we all know Twitter for being at times fairly toxic. So whether it's just kind of hustle culture in general, or it can get combative and you get into these heated bits, I think it's just something to be aware of. There's also kind of a large segment of freelancers or individuals who maybe by some definition are in your niche area, or they do the job that you do. Yeah. But they do it for personal wealth. And so their approach to the entire way that, you perform your job, you're kind of talking past each other and maybe accidentally insulting one another. So it's just something to be aware of when you're engaging in that space. I think that covers a lot of the weird quirkiness. Again, I think I already covered the speed of it. It doesn't last very long unless you start to get retweets, and then you might see a day or two where you're in the limelight. But
yeah, I totally agree. I'm literally just grabbing my phone right now to look at my profile because I think what's interesting. Yes, I joined October of 2008 for Twitter. So coming up on, what does that make that? 14-year anniversary of being on Twitter. It's I think it's weird. I mean, I literally remember some of my first tweets were like a SMS, like literally just like a text message that would post it there. So I feel like like the evolution of it has been so fascinating too, as you think about distribution and things, and just what it was early on of just kind of like, I feel like a lot of discovery, I feel like was a really big thing that still can be an element to that, but just like following the right people, they were just uncovering amazing, whatever, free resources online, or like tools, or even just from like a personal perspective, like restaurants and stuff like that. Like it was I think a really big interesting part of it. But I would say having been on there for so long, the one thing that I think has been the common thread is the like engagement aspect of it. Whereas, like you said, LinkedIn, some of the others, there's certainly engagement and there's some comments and whatnot, but like it doesn't have the same like flowing conversation of people getting tagged in and all of a sudden they're commenting, and you can kind of have just this very like fluid and dynamic conversation with people on Twitter that's unique. So I feel like that is really a factor that's been consistent for a really long time, but is also just a bit quirky because you have to, just takes a little bit of time to kind of understand the dynamics of that. And sometimes it's weird getting tagged into something that's already, conversation's already going on, and kind of jump in, or if you miss it because you were watching a movie for 2 hours, then realizing like, oh, I still want to kind of chime in, but the moment's kind of passed, and like I can, but it just won't be the same. And so it can be anyway extremely timely, highly dynamic, but can be some fantastic conversation and engagement that comes from it too.
Yeah, I love the one-on-one aspect of Twitter. I do get a sincere sense that I'm interacting with someone more than I do on LinkedIn. And then the only other part I would add is like, as far as amplification goes, it is one of the only channels I know that, other than like the new, like TikTok, right? We obviously see the algorithms naturally do that. But on Twitter, I think the like retweet or their version of the share is promoted. It's also pretty low energy to retweet someone. It almost represents equally with the like thumbs up. They're like, I agree with this, and I don't mind just like throwing it out there, to where it's been disincentivized on, say, LinkedIn, where if you share, you see your impressions crash. So I think that's one of the reasons why the amplification aspect is one of the reasons why I think Twitter is so interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's the other thing that I was thinking about is just that it feels a lot more fluid to be able to go from sort of the public, maybe comment on someone's post, they reply, a couple back and forths. It feels far more fluid to kick over and like DM that person and potentially continue a conversation that way. And I feel like that happens a lot more naturally than on LinkedIn comments. Like from my experience anyway, I think it would be quite jarring to like switch to the messages on LinkedIn and start chatting there. Like it just doesn't happen. Like Twitter literally just feels like you're kind of just like flipping around to the backside of the thread, versus
let's continue
LinkedIn,
what we already started.
Yeah. So I think there can be some power in that too. Like there's especially if you're doing anything where it's trying to kind of build relationships for consulting work or to generate leads or anything like that. Like the fluidity to be able to just kick over into DMs and continue from there, I think is pretty unique to Twitter as well.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's a really good point. Um, I I'd be curious, kind of your perspective on this, but I think that speaks a lot to the interpersonality of Twitter and the conversationalist of it. But like in your experience and having worked at a SaaS company, do you think Twitter is like a strong place for brands? Can you have a strong presence there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed a lot. Gone are the days of um, having a company Twitter profile that is essentially there to share links to content you're creating, or webinar invites, or join us at this booth, whatever, and like that's kind of all there is. So I mean, even I worked at a SaaS company, Sprout Social, that was social media management platform. So like we we were very involved in that and doing our own thing. And I think that was extremely early, that you would just sort of like, oh yeah, I want to follow this brand, and like maybe get uh, you know uh, options for a sale going on, or a discount code or something like that. Like it was very like transactional. Um, and then I think pretty quickly we started to see, as a SaaS company, the sort of inbound support type of queries and stuff like that. And so I think that's a huge area where um, the the brand profile on Twitter becomes so much more than like a marketing channel, and truly like a communication extension of the brand, to where you have like engagement, like directly interacting with people in what feels like one-on-one conversation. You have some marketing related sharing type of things, and then you have any sort of like customer support type of things, where you're actually helping people out directly on from the Twitter account. And some companies have like the main brand profile and like a customer support profile. Some people do it all in one. Like there's a number of things there, but I think that's like sort of the high level on it. And I think so much of it just depends on who's running the account and sort of their personality and their take. Like obviously there's examples, like Wendy's and some of those, where like there's a lot of bite to whoever's writing the copy and the responses, and it's very punchy and funny, and it gains a lot of attention. But you could also have super boring content that comes from a brand too. So I think that's a big factor, is kind of who's running it, what's the brand voice and the style, and kind of all of that. And so there's certainly, I think companies that do a good job, like Ahrefs and SEMrush, and, Gong, HubSpot. Like there's a number of those that are pulling a lot of insights, dropping that out, super engaged, super active and responsive as a profile. I think it can work, but to your point earlier, like it should. It's so much better when it is tied to personal engagement too, and like here's some leaders in our company, or the founder, or just some bigger personalities. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities to be prominent, but I think less companies now are trying to focus on making their brand profile on Twitter the number one hub and a point of contact, I guess, for the company, because there's a lot more coming from the personal side.
I totally forgot about the customer support aspect of that. But that's wild. So is that something you've seen like content distribution work through, in terms of, the support team being able to distribute content like that? Or are you saying more like one-on-one conversation with?
Yeah, I think mostly it's been, the use case has been like, I'm, as a social media manager, or as a customer support person on social, I'm literally taking something that someone's like, hey, the site's down, reply easy, like, yeah, here's our site status, acknowledge, we're working on it. Might be a quick communication like that. Or there's like some bigger stuff that's like, hey, let's escalate, flip over to DMs, like talk through a little bit more, and then from the tool create an actual ticket in your support tool, whether that's Zendesk or Help Scout or whatever it might be. So I think there's levels of it. Like there's things they can quickly answer directly in a comment, and then there's like flipping over into DMs, and then there's like actually creating tickets into the support side.
Got it. Nice.
Yeah. So I think I think what's interesting to kind of get back to like the distribution side of things, and not just like high level on the social channels, is like I think would be great to kind of have you just kind of kick into like what things we've seen that work when it comes to like successful content distribution on Twitter. You've been doing that, quite a bit for us and everything. So we'd love to kind of hear you.
Yeah. There. So I think if you're leveraging, a personal profile, the biggest thing right now seems to be threads, a thread of some sort. These are punchy. They offer a lot of information. I know there's a lot around like zero click, like leave all the value on the platform. I think that's very true of Twitter, or the people who hang out on Twitter. I don't think it's universally true of Twitter in ways that I do feel like LinkedIn, it's harder to drag people off of. And I say that from personal experience promoting my own newsletter, which is, I'd never put my link in the first bit, but I'll essentially write a thread that is my entire newsletter.
Yeah.
Sometimes 20 to 30 thread posts long.
Yep.
With a link at the bottom that's just like, if you want this in a more friendly format, here it is.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, in the process of 4 months, I had 500 subscribers. I had over 10,000 people who like jumped into that content and looked at it, read it, was getting comments and DMs, that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting. And like you'll see this, like if you pop onto Twitter right now, and we're sort of nearing the end of this phase, but it was really hot for like the last month, where these threads were like, websites so valuable they should be illegal. And everyone gets tired of a thing on Twitter pretty quickly, so it doesn't last long. But those were very valuable, and almost all of them were asking you to click off of Twitter and to like explore that thing and appreciate it in a certain way. And I think that's that is a unique aspect of Twitter, that the algorithm doesn't necessarily in the middle of a thread like ding you for sending people off platform.
Yeah.
It's also one of the, I've seen many people who kind of run up the follower count and like gain prominence in an industry by doing that sort of co-marketing style. And so they'll do a thing where they're like, here's 10 pieces, or here's 7 pieces I read this week, and every Saturday they post that thread, and then each of those 7 articles that they complement, they give this sort of like TLDR bullet list, and they at the person who wrote that content and include a link. And all of those authors kind of come flying in because they're like, sweet, like let's get this thing going, and they retweet, and you're like, it benefits everyone, making a pretty unique space. So those are kind of some of the things that I've seen, and that type of content is generally geared towards either like really interesting things you got to see, or very specifically how to do something that's more of like a trick or a hack to like benefit you in your professional life.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I think like in terms of thinking about a company saying, hey, we're gonna build this strategy to distribute our content on social, the employee personal brand side of it, obviously like social advocacy is a big area in terms of tapping into the people in your company to help promote. But I think the interesting thing is like from Twitter perspective, it just doesn't work to say like, hey, everyone on our team, go share this content on your Twitter profile. I think there has to be like an actual desire and willingness from people to be on Twitter and engaging, and not just popping on to share a link once a week or something. So when you think about that for your company and how you're wanting to do distribution from the personal side, I do think that it's a bit of a self-selecting thing, and really just probably a little bit more of championing the folks on your team that are engaging and are sort of proactively building the personal brand versus wanting to kind of mandate that across the entire team. And then in terms of like the brand perspective and content distribution, I think one of the biggest things is just having a steady stream. Like you said, like a Twitter thread, the example you gave was like whatever, 20, 30 tweets that are breaking down an entire newsletter. I think similarly, even if it's not threads, like a company Twitter profile would benefit a lot from just taking snippets from content on the website, whether that's clips from a webinar, clips from a podcast, a section of a blog post, or data from a data report or whatever, and actually just sharing it as just like this, making the brand profile this steady stream of like insights and value that don't require you to go click off and to the site and read the whole thing or watch the whole thing. And so I think that's a really, really big part of it, is just that connection, to say, hey, here's everything our social media team is wanting to do. Let's make sure that there is a clear process of, as content's being created, what's the plan for distribution? How do we have this steady stream of value going out that is not requiring people to click to the site?
And I see a lot of, really small, small marketing teams on companies who they essentially have their brand become like version 2.0 of the most prominent person at their company. Mm-hmm. And so you'll see that person sort of generate a lot of attention, and then they sort of drag the brand behind them. Mm-hmm. So like every once in a while they're retweeting the brand, and showcasing like, hey, if you like what I have to say, you'll like what our brand has to say, because I'm writing the brand content as well. And so why not follow two of these things?
Yeah, I think it's, I think there's, so again, from a distribution standpoint, I think that that's a really big part of Twitter distribution, content distribution, is breaking up and just pulling a lot of that out and sharing that through. But I do think there's, the other aspect is what I mentioned before, is just sort of that personality. Like, when it's done right, I think the brand profiles can, be a bit snarky, or, actually jump in on a thread and comment, there and actually like leave a valid response, just like as you would from a personal account, from the brand account. I think it just all comes down to kind of what your company's comfortable with and what the resources you have to be able to do that. Because if you're like outsourcing social, that's extremely difficult for someone outsourced to be able to really jump in and engage from a brand account, and just probably going to be a little bit more of a steady flow of what they're doing from that standpoint. So, sure. But yeah, I do think it's possible. And like, so far, we still haven't created a company Twitter account, primarily just because we haven't had a clear idea of like what we would use it for, and I'd rather have no Twitter account for 10-speed than to have one that looks poorly done or like a ghost town. So
I think if I were on Twitter and like helping 10-speed run, it just, I think for us as a brand, it becomes a time thing. Yeah. Because I think there's you need to spend time on Twitter, and like, not only are you dedicating time, but like a thread, you can take 30 minutes to 45 minutes to write a really great thread that you kind of whittle down, it's value packed. And if you got to do that and then spend time responding to everyone who responds to it, mm-hmm. there's a lot there. And on top of like, and that we're also managing LinkedIn and kind of what's going on over here for distribution. and then trying to create content. And we're creating this podcast, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of pragmatic reasons for just being like, okay, this is possible. I see it, but we might have to build to that point.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, I think, one of the other areas to move into that we wanted to cover today was just, if you had to list some of the ways to make sure that you're getting the most out of Twitter, what would you recommend? So I guess you could call it kind of best practices or however you want to look at that. But, trying to distill some of our perspective and experience into a little bit more tangible takeaways, I think.
Yeah. So I guess to repeat on some of these is, regular employee or founder presence is probably very important. Don't forget about your actual profile. So if you're going to distribute something, a lot of people on Twitter will bounce back to check out your profile. It's one of the interesting parts. Yep. But have you utilized the banner to say what you do, or to promote some other thing you're working on, or an aspect of your marketing that you want people to engage with? You set up a link, all of that stuff. If you pinned your most prominent tweet at the top so people have a sense of who you are. As far as threads go, I think remember that you can use links in your threads. People will move off of that platform occasionally, but if you're going to do it, I put it at the very end, or if it makes sense narratively, feel free to insert links in the center, but in general, save it. It'll allow you to get more traction and more impressions on that tweet.
Yeah.
I think another key aspect that we did touch on is start promoting others. You're going to need people's help for visibility, and you pretty quickly start to feel like you're on a team, even if you've never met these people. Like their stuff, retweet their stuff, and they'll likely do the same for you. Obviously, read it, make sure you agree with it, because if you promote the wrong thing, you'll feel
right.
silly.
Yep.
It doesn't take, that is one unique thing. It doesn't take long for something wrong or terrible to blow up worse than it actually is. So it's just something to be mindful of. I think creating things of value is always obviously the point, but really you want to create something so valuable, probably with another creator in mind, or another person in your industry in mind, a specific person, so you can end up in their threads and you can kind of return that favor. But that is a key part. It's trying to get in other people's threads so you blow up without the effort of creating every day. And then I know we touched on this as well, but it's just make your post less prose style. So you've got your threads, you kind of think of those as bullet points. They're short, you're writing in phrases. It's less usually of a rant or prose style way of writing out your thoughts or promoting a piece of content.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, and I would add, I think we touched on it in a prior episode, you can't just copy or cut up what you did, post it on LinkedIn, and drop it onto Twitter. It does require the language you use and kind of how you approach it, and the casual nature that you mentioned earlier in this episode, taking all of that into account, and not just I'm going to hurry up and cross post to multiple channels, but making sure you kind of tailor it to that, I think is important. Understanding the dynamic of your brand profile versus personal profiles, kind of what you're doing there. I mentioned earlier, not expecting the entire company to distribute on Twitter. I think it's just weird when you have someone on your team that's got 27 followers and all they do is post stuff about their favorite sports team, and then mixed in there is randomly something about your company or whatever. I think just kind of being mindful of that and letting the folks that do want to be engaged on there do that. And then just being I would say lastly, just kind of knowing what you want to get out of it, and if that means not having a company Twitter profile, fine. if it's heavily engaged and you do like it makes sense for your company to actually have support people in there, and you actually do quite a bit of interaction on Twitter, that's also great. And then you just kind of build process around, when does it escalate, when does it kick to DM, kind of all that stuff. So I think that's a big part of it. It's just kind of understanding how your company wants to use it, if they want to use it at all, from a company profile perspective.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. I think there's a lot there. We do have some resources on our site that's a very detailed walkthrough of like how to create Twitter posts and threads from the written content, blog content you're already creating. So a lot of very tactical advice there if that's something you're exploring and wanting to learn more about. As I said before, we will be touching on a similar episode on LinkedIn distribution next episode, so be sure to check that out. But you can visit 10speed.io/podcast to see all of the past episodes. You can also sign up to receive and get notification new ones. Of course, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, any of those. We appreciate the support and listening, and always feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any of this. Thanks a lot, Derek.
Yeah, thanks for having me.